Do you remember what your children sounded like when they were little? Through the lenses of this microcassette recorder, cassette tapes, an old green cell phone, it's an emotional journey back to the good old days when our kids were kids. Next.
This TV show is sponsored by iPhones!
Welcome to the good old days. I am your host, Kevin Costner. Thank you for being here. The good old days is not always a distant place far removed from our lives. Sometimes it's our past. This episode of the good old days when our kids were kids is for anyone who has children or one day may be a parent. Through the lenses of the items I just showed you, I'm going to share some special recordings and video of my kids as representation of how quickly time moves as our children grow up. It's a process that happens in an instant, and as parents can be really hard to accept once that's happened. Now for parents, I'm sure you have your own lenses through which to go back to the good old days when your kids were kids. For future parents, I hope you enjoy the sounds and sights of childhood. It's a period that comes on suddenly and is over with far too quickly. So off we go, to remember what it was like back in the good old days when our kids were kids. My son was mad at me. Before he could get his first cell phone, he had to achieve certain grades in school. Once he got those grades, he did get that first cell phone, the Motorola flip phone, for those of you that remember what type of phone that was. The reason he was mad at me was because his younger sister, Michaela, got her first cell phone without having to do basically anything. Well, that's not entirely accurate. She did have to do one thing, and that is get stranded at a friend's house whose parents didn't have a phone in the house. Michaela was tired, bored, wanted to come home before the scheduled pickup time, but she couldn't call me. I was so incensed by this. The very next day, she had her first phone, this cute green phone right here. The good old days, LG Chocolate. Easily the coolest name of any cell phone ever made. Now, Alec did get over being mad at me. He came to understand why I did what I did in getting Michaela her first phone without having to get certain grades in school. He also came to love the fact that Michaela could call him or me anytime she wanted.
When I was riding my scooter, I was trying to go over the curb, and it was kind of a big bump.
This little cell phone right here became a very special item. Like all cell phones of this era, it did one thing, and one thing only. It allowed you to talk. It did not text, email, or internet. There was no Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snap, WhatsApp, Skype, YouTube, or Google. When my kids wanted to talk to me or their mother, they pushed numbers and they called us. If we did not answer, they did something that's become so much a part of the good old days. They left voicemails.
Dad, there's that turkey right here. So come and get me right off the gym. Okay, bye. Dad, where are you? I don't know my shorts. I need my stuff. It's a wonder why we have to go sledding. There's so much snowing. It's so cool.
My daughter got this phone when she was 7 years old, but this time I was divorced, with my ex-wife and I sharing joint legal and physical custody of both Michaela and Alec. It was a rough patch, and Michaela called me often. When I could not answer, she'd leave me a voicemail. Every time she left me one, she started it out with,
Hi, Dad, it's me, Michaela.
"Hi, Dad, it's Michaela," as if I would not recognize that cute voice or know who she was. Over the course of 5 years, every single voicemail she left me started that way. Her high-pitched little voice making sure Dad would never forget who she was. "Hi, Dad, it's Michaela." And she talked fast.
Hey, Dad, it's Michaela. Don't go back to the wrong bed. Can't have you back. Go back to previous days. Okay, all right, see you later. Okay, let's go back to the previous bye. Hey, Dad, it's Michaela. Call back to the action. Bye.
For some reason, and to this day I don't know what gave me the idea, I did not delete those voicemails once I listened to them. I left them in my voicemail inbox until I just could not receive any more. That's when I went out and purchased this microcassette recorder and decided to start recording off every voicemail my kids left me. Michaela called me a lot, which was adorable. Understand, I was divorced when my kids were young, and we had a split household, so they spent half the time with mom, half the time with me. So that's one of the reasons I received so many calls.
Sorry to answer my phone, it was tied, so I turned it off. When you get at the mall, as you know, go on the computer and check your messages and see if my game today came on. Come on!
So I recorded all those voicemails onto these micro cassette tapes. Beautiful thing is, as they kept leaving them, I kept recording them. And after a few years, new phones started coming out. My kids' phones were upgraded that delivered new features. That's when they discovered texting. And it wasn't too long after those first few texts were sent to me that the voicemail stopped and did not start again. So this is a finite record of a period in my kids' young lives that, again, I was lucky enough to record. For it's those young voices that defines the good old days of my kids' childhood to me. And yes, I still have most of those old cell phones so I could keep those texts. Maybe that's a future good old days sequel to this episode. Those young voices also have opinions. We tend to discount those opinions because they come from a child. As I have learned many times, just because they're young doesn't mean they're not more intelligent and insightful than we are. Our children are gifted with the ability to see, to perceive things in the unique ways of a child. As adults, our minds have become a bit structured, often incapable of seeing things in any unfiltered, pure ways. Alec, Michaela, and their younger brother Braden have presented me many examples of this fact. Just recently, Braden made it very clear to me during a visit to a local escape room that I was being too controlling and needed to listen to him. I stepped back. He was right, and he got us out of that room. One of my favorite good old days memories happened when Alec was young, maybe 8 years old, and he'd gotten into Yugioh cards. How many of you remember Yugioh cards? There were these Yu-Gi-Oh tins containing sets of cards that had just come out. Alec and I had seen them during a visit to Toys R Us, something we did back in the good old days before most people bought everything on Amazon. Alec was insistent I buy these tins. I took one look at the price, something like $15 each, and said there was no way I am spending $15 on some tins of cards. Later that day, I'm on eBay, and I noticed those same tins of cards were selling for nearly $200 each. I sped back to this Toys R Us, only to find all the tins gone. I then ran to every Toys R Us in town, all gone. In those few short hours, those parents that listened to their genius children had bought them all up. Alec got that tin. He also ended up with one of the largest collections of Yu-Gi-Oh cards anywhere. Alec was right. I should have listened to him and we would have made some good money together. But I discounted his opinion because he was a kid and I thought he was just angling to get more stuff. As parents, when our kids are kids, we need to remember that those minds are not little, they're growing and doing so rapidly. They perceive things in ways so different than our own. We should listen to them, consider what they say, and take their advice when appropriate. Sometimes our greatest advisors and mentors in life are not other adults, they're our kids. There was a movie made by my namesake. In A Field of Dreams, the underlying theme of the movie was time going by, and it was emotionally represented by Kevin Costner's character seeking to have a catch with his father who had passed away long ago. Of course, in the movie, he got that chance, and there could not have been a dry eye in the house as father and son started tossing the ball around. Unfortunately, outside of Hollywood, those second chances don't exist. Until someone figures out another way, time moves in one direction and one direction only. If we want to have a catch with our young kids once they have grown up, when we throw that ball, there's no one over there to catch it. Here at the good old days, the lenses through which we take our trips bring us back to those long gone days. And sometimes those trips can be quite emotional to take. We as parents need to be present, physically and mentally, for our kids and the memories we're creating with them. For once those memories become part of the good old days, unless we were focused on the moments as they were created, the past will have a story to tell that we won't remember. Time. It's what happens when we're paying attention to something else. It's a fact that makes it hard to remember. And nowhere is that more true than when it comes to our kids. See, children present a different form of time. Anyone who's a parent has commented, "I don't know where the time went. One moment they're crawling on the ground in diapers, now they're moving out." Time moves the quickest when it comes to our kids growing up. In fact, what I call childhood time is unique. It's a period that goes by in an instant. We'd love to slow it down, but it is an unstoppable force of nature. So, there's two forms of time when you have children that I've identified. There's childhood time from the parent perspective, where your kids grow up overnight. Except, while you're going through it, time can move slowly. Your kids are tired, they're hungry, they're cranky. You're tired, hungry, and cranky. You're trying to do everything, be everything to everyone. You're multitasking. It's those moments on a day-to-day basis where time can just crawl along. Then there's time from a child's perspective where it moves more slowly. Kids are amazing. They have this ability to look forward to things that are coming up and exciting things they might be doing with friends while almost simultaneously being bored. "I'm bored. I have nothing to do. No friends to play with. Don't like my toys. Don't want to watch TV. Mom and Dad play with me." So to a child, time has a different perspective. But that's changing as society changes. With our kids being connected so much online all the time, they're switched on, constantly stimulated with all this information and knowledge, just inundating them. Even to a child, time seems to be speeding up. Braden recently came to me and made the comment he thought time was really moving by quickly. Just a few years ago, no 14-year-old would have ever said such a thing. So even to a child, all this connectedness, all the stuff we're doing, is putting us in the position of facing our greatest challenge ever with time. The more we do, the more simultaneous things, the more multitasking we involve ourselves with, the faster time moves by. Yep, paying attention to you. I am, yeah. Full attention, every word. The mistake we as adults make in our daily lives, and worse, when it comes to our kids, is multitasking. For some reason, we have this disjointed belief that doing multiple things at once allows us to get more done, be more efficient, and be everything we can be to everyone. It doesn't. Multitasking impacts our ability to form long-term memories. As I commented a moment ago, without those memories, the items we use as lenses to the past will show us nothing but blank space. Failing to pay full attention to the present moment robs you of a chance to go back to the good old days. Stop and consider. Where was your smartphone the last time you played a game or went to the park with your kids? Did you answer it? Text? Email? What about checking sports scores or stock quotes? How about the last time you were at Disneyland? How often were you on the phone and not taking photos and video? Remember, time is what happens when we're paying attention to something else, so it's probably best to stop doing that. Also, our kids' brains are still developing, so multitasking is probably a practice best avoided by them as well. I love creating for the good old days, and the idea for this episode came to me while digitizing the voicemails you've been hearing. Listening to them, though, for me was tough. So much so, I had to mute my computer because I was feeling so much emotion just listening to that adorable, high-pitched little voice that I started wondering, how do we as parents avoid falling into a state of despair about our kids growing up as they're going through it? What's amazing is they're growing up all the time. We celebrate a birthday each year, and throughout the year, we actually get to witness that growth as we buy them larger shoes, longer pants, and even adjust those snapback caps one hole at a time. Even as their childhood is speeding by, though, somehow, we don't see that from a long-term perspective, only for that moment. In some respects, it's like what many women have told me about childbirth. If they remembered the pain from child number 1, there is no child number 2. That, my friends, is a form of selective amnesia, and I feel we are gifted as parents with another form of selective amnesia that keeps us from having a long-term perspective about just how short our kids' childhoods really are. If we did have the long-term view, most of us would likely end up in a constant state of despondency. So we see things in finite, short periods of time until they sneak up on us, and suddenly we're out shopping with our kids for their own home. Alec purchased his first house and moved out in February.
Thank you so much for the present.
During the introductory video to the Good Old Days channel, I made the comment that we have a tendency to glorify the good old days, and that maybe the good old days were anything but just people living their lives, doing the best they can. There's no doubt we glorify the past. It's easy to do with the past that happened before us. But for a past that we did live, it's amazing how the challenges that might have existed in our past fade away with time, as it was with our kids when they were young. While it was occurring, our kids' childhoods were just another daily event, and it was easy to get lost in whatever was happening at any moment. During those moments, we weren't always present and patient for our kids, keeping us from enjoying a time that was speeding away. For not until it was over did we recognize just how quickly childhood vanished. When it comes to the good old days when our kids were kids, time has that way of erasing the negatives of our past. And it's okay. This isn't glorification, but the true goodness of those moments shining through whatever stuff was clouding our vision at that time. For me, this cassette player, tapes, and old cell phone were the lenses that took me back to when my kids were kids. Your lenses will be something different, but know this, whatever takes you on that trip, those lenses will showcase a clarity of that time for you as they did for me. And with that clarity, we'll remember and honor a very short period of time that defined each of us as the loving parents of wonderful young people who we guided into this world and helped navigate into their own lives. Our kids, in turn, will create their own memories that one day they'll revisit back in...
Hi, Dad. It's Michaela.
the good old days. Until next time, love you, Dot. Thanks for the recordings and wonderful memories.
It's just nice to meet another human that shares my affinity for elf culture.